أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد والثناء لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين بائث الأنبياء والمرسلين نحمده ونستعين ونتوكل إليه ونصلي ونسلم على حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد صلى على محمد ثم نصلي ونسلم على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين أما بعد فقد قال الله تعالى في قرآن الحكيم وهو أصدق القائلين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولقد كرمنا بني آدم وحملناهم في بر والبحر ورزقناهم من طيبات وفضلناهم على كثير ممن خلقنا تفضيلا صدق الله العلي العظيم وصدق رسول الأمين ونحن على ذلك من الشاهدين والشاكرين صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for joining me here and giving me the honor to speak to you. There's other programs going on, and I hope that in this time we spend together, we can make it worthwhile. I want to start off with a disclaimer. Conferences, you come to a conference and you go to numerous talks. What's the purpose of the talks? What are we trying to achieve in these talks? We have profound titles. We have titles that some of us, and maybe sometimes even the speakers, may not understand, because some of them are actually decided by the organization. So what's the purpose? Is it to leave that room after those 90 minutes, having a comprehensive understanding to that topic, having the answers to all your questions, having the solution? What is it we expect and what is it that can be delivered? I want to speak on behalf of myself to say that my approach is hopefully to leave any conversation, to leave any such gathering in a way that we leave with things to think about. We leave on a certain trajectory. We leave with ideas that we can allow to cook in our minds, to ponder over, and hopefully we leave with some general rules of thinking. And should we apply those general rules of thinking, and should we implement them in our lives, hopefully they will act as a catalyst to help answer future questions, to help answer the current questions. Not all questions may be answered immediately. Some require thought, some require experiences for us to really relate and for them to resonate with us. But hopefully, with some of these conversations, we have in our mind the approach we can take to answering those questions. So I wanted to start with that disclaimer, inshallah. The topic I'll be speaking about today, inshallah, it's not the Quran and nobility and human rights, it's nobility in the Quran and human rights. And that's how I wanted to speak about it. If we tried to speak about the three different topics, we wouldn't be able to do any of them justice. The approach I want to take here is, hopefully I want it to be a little bit interaction in the beginning, more so towards the end. I'm going to start off with some theory. Unfortunately, I'm not going to give too many examples. I want you to think about the examples by applying any general idea that we use. We'll make it a little bit more interactive towards the end, and hopefully we'll have some ample time for questions and answers. So we started with reciting the ayah, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. It says, certainly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaking, He said, certainly we have honored the children of Adam and carried them over land and sea, provided them with good things, good sustenance, and given them an advantage over many of those who we have created with a complete preference. In this ayah, God is speaking about one of his creations and introducing one of his creations. But he does so in a very interesting way. Could we go to that? How does he do so? He says that we ennobled man, we honored man. And then you'd expect him to tell us, how did you do so? In what way did you do so? And he says, we carried him over land and sea. That's not the first thing most of us would think about God explaining when he's talking about nobility. Him carrying us over land and sea. How does that relate to human nobility? It says we have given him sustenance through the good things, and we have preferred him with a complete preference. Those of you who have followed some of my writings know that first of all I like to break down the ayah to see different parts of the ayah, look at that, and then we can go further into the discussion, inshallah. We'll go on to the next slide. So, what has nobility been associated within this ayah? The three things. It's that we carried man over land and sea, we gave sustenance from good things, and that we gave merit and preference over other creation. Let's look at each of these. Next slide. So, وَحَمَلْنَاهُمْ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ. And we'll explain what karama means. We'll come to that. But first, let's talk about what is this karama that God is introducing. What is it associated with? What does he immediately bring into the picture when he speaks about this karama that he's given to the children of Adam, you and I, inshallah? We carried him, Bani Adam, over land and sea. Scholars say that being carried over land and sea is related to the rest of creation. Human being able to employ the rest of creation into their own service. Right? Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala says that we created the earth for human being. So the rest of creation, animals, right? We use animals, plants. Human beings come and use all of these other creations of God and employ them in their own service. They use them to meet their own needs, right? So one of the ways that human beings are kareem, according to the verse, or at least one of the associations of karama for the human being, is being able to use other creation. One thing, humans uniquely control animals for transport. Generally speaking, no other animal controls another animal for transport. Okay, you may see some TikTok videos of a monkey getting on top of a dog, directing it in certain directions. But generally speaking, there's no ends. The human animals don't, in a sophisticated manner, employ other animals for transport, or at least they cannot guide the transport. They may use animals for transport. Birds may sit on another animal as they cross the Sahara, but they cannot direct the movement as such. Human beings are able to very specifically make use of the other creation. Another alternative reading though, and this is the main reading that most have given, but I want to focus, why does it say land and sea? The two different things. What do we use of the sea? Yes, we use the animals in the sea, but God could have said just creation. I think one of the things that are being pointed out here is that when it says land, what God is referring to is, yes, human beings use other animals and they use plants and they use crops. But when it talks about sea and hamalna, like carrying them over the sea and carrying them on the animals to carry them on land, over the sea, what do they use? Boats, ships. So the land is in reference to human beings able to control other creations. The mention of the sea, carrying over the sea, is the reference to human ability. The human, 2 feet, no gills, unable to breathe underwater for too long, is somehow able to go to the middle of the ocean. Is able to cross continents. And I think this carrying over sea is reference to the ability that God has given man to be able to create, to be able to think and design for themselves. So this is the first part. وَحَمَلْنَاهُ عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ. وَرَزَقْنَاهُمْ مِنَ الطَّيِّبَاتِ. There's an error on the first, but it should be just وَرَزَقْنَاهُمْ مِنَ الطَّيِّبَاتِ. That we gave him good sustenance. Now what does it mean? All animals eat. Every animal eats. What is it talking about? Why is it associated, the human karama is associated with what the sustenance that humans are given? Shaytani, for those you know, who happens to be a Lebanese Syrian scholar, Shaytani mentions 3 meanings for the word tayyib. Right? And there's more meanings for tayyib. But the 3 he mentions are that something which is tayyib, so when we're talking about good food or good sustenance, the first thing is that which is opposite of disgusting. Tayyib is often in opposition to khabatha, khabith. So that which is tayyib is not khabith. It doesn't disgust you when you eat it. Right? So human beings have been given food that does not disgust them. Or they eat from that which does not disgust them, and they do not eat that which is disgusting. Another meaning is clean and pure. You eat and they eat from that which is clean and pure. And this is interesting. I'm going to try to stay within the topic. I'm very easily distracted and go into other topics, so I'm going to try to stick with the PowerPoint. So clean and pure, they eat that which is clean and pure. Another is that they eat that which does not cause them harm. What they eat, it doesn't cause harm to their bodies. And it's interesting because it's not the human beings that we recognize today. We're barely eating that which is pure, that which is good for our bodies. But in any case, the karama of human beings has been associated with the risk and sustenance. Whatever the meaning is, we have to understand it in relation to human nobility. So when we say that God has given that sustenance, and then we also want to say we don't limit sustenance to food. Clothing. When they have clothing, they make sure the clothing is pure. Make sure that the clothing is appropriate and not a clothing which is off-putting. A clothing which does not cause harm. And I want you to take that in your own. What does that mean? Is that spiritual? Is that physical? Does that mean that I don't go outside with a t-shirt in the Chicago weather? What does that mean? Or is it talking about something spiritual in how they clothe themselves? So that's the second thing that's associated with karama. Yep. وَفَضَلْنَاهُمْ عَلَى كَثِيرٍ مِّمَّنْ خَلَقْنَاهُ تَفْضِيلًا. It's usually translated as, and we gave them an advantage over many of those we have created. How do you understand this verse? It says that we created human beings, we created many other beings, and we gave human beings merit and preference over many of the other beings. That's how many of the translators and many people understand this verse. An alternative reason, alternative reading of this verse, that we preferred the human being is not that we preferred them over many of other creation. So yes, we preferred them over the ants and the snails and the whales and the trees and the stars and the moons, right? And some people, especially in the Sunni tafsir, they'll say that we have to read it in this way, this particular way, because we cannot assume that the human being is greater than the angels. So that's the reason it's saying mimman khalaqnahum, min meaning from, is because there's creation that human beings aren't greater than. However, the alternative reading is that we have given them advantage, even though we have created many creations, kathir, we have given human beings advantage over all of them. And so there's nothing more preferred as a creation in the eyes of God than human beings. So I want to ask you a question. What are the reasons for this preference in creation? Why and how are human beings preferred over other creation? Any thoughts? Intellect. Free will. Any from here?
I guess elevated consciousness.
Elevated consciousness. Hassan? These are generally the ideas that are given, and some of the ones that we just mentioned earlier, in that they are able to employ other creation into their service, and the intellect, the free will, the consciousness. All of these are what the scholars say contribute, and we'll come to them as we go along.
The word is aql.
The word is aql, yes.
It's not quite intellect.
It's not intellect.
Similar, but not the same.
The function of what we understand the Greek aql to be is not what the Quran is referring to as aql, yes. The Quran is when it talks about the intellect, it's talking about a faculty that serves a particular purpose and not just a simple process of reasoning. But we translate loosely here, aql for now. So what is this karama? We spoke about all of these things associated with karama. What is karama? Karama, nobility, honor, magnanimity. It can't be translated into one English word because it encompasses so much. It takes in and includes so much. Some people said, Yarhamakumullah, it says that it's the collective good and the source for goodness. Meaning karama is not just an attribute. It's an attribute that becomes a source of many other attributes. So karama leads to kindness. Karama leads to patience. Karama leads to tolerance. Karama leads to courage. So it's the collective good and it's the source for goodness. So other good characteristics are linked back to karama. Someone who's kareem. It's also the opposite of abasement and shallowness. Ihana, al-ihana. I won't read the Arabic of the Quranic ayah because it's one of the mustahab sajda ones, and I don't think you have space here. But it says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that whomever Allah humiliates will find no one who may bring him karama, kareem, no one that will make him kareem. So karama has been put in opposition to abasement, being humiliated. So the one who is kareem is and cannot be humiliated. And to the extent that you are humiliated, to that extent you're not kareem. It's not zero. It's not like it's not that you can never, no part of you is kareem if you have some parts of you which are abased. But true karama cannot be achieved without the removal of that abasement. Next slide. Three possibilities about the acquisition of nobility. How do we get this nobility? Like, why do we have it? Human beings have this nobility, but what does it mean for them to have it? Again, the ulama have said that, so this nobility that you have, what is the nature of your possession of that nobility? Is it innate? Is it something which is inseparable from your being? Is it part of your being? So some say it's essential and innate to human beings and cannot be removed. Under no circumstances can nobility be stripped from the children of Adam. And say children of Adam, I keep remembering Narnia, son of Adam and daughter of Eve. It is conditional and only applies to certain humans. The other view is that, no, but when we say that human beings are noble, we don't mean everyone. That's bizarre. Only some people. You deserve it. You earn it. It applies only, for example, to the believers, right? Another view is that it's a default and primary setting for most humans. Meaning the default for a human being when you first see them and you know nothing about them is this person is a noble person. This person has nobility. That is the default for the human being. However, it can be obstructed. They can do things that can remove that karama from them. So it's not essential in the sense that they cannot be perceived without it, but it's the default setting. That's how you deal with them. Until you have a reason to act otherwise, you treat them with karama. Next slide, please. So those are the three, and you're asking which one is it? It's a combination. The scholars view, most, like at least more contemporary scholars view that the human being has that karama, is being given that karama, but can act in a manner which makes them no longer have access to the same rights as someone who is kareem. Hopefully we can go into that later. So other reasons for nobility, and we'll go through this a little faster. I do want to leave enough time for Q&A. Carries the spirit of God. Human beings, they carry the spirit of God. The ruh of God is in the things. God has fashioned the innate nature of man fitra, khalifa on earth. We're taught by God. God says that He taught Adam. He taught human beings. خلق الإنسان علم بالقلم. And that they use the intellect. So these are the reasons why we have nobility. And I'm mentioning this, we're building a case like this being has all of these things, has all of these qualities. So they should show, they should be expressed in their being, right? In the way that they act and behave and how they conduct themselves and how they think and how they view the world. And it's interesting, when you are the preferred creation, when you are the Kareem and you have been made afdal over everything else, then it begs the question, and how can you live for other things? You're the best of creation. God has said, I made you better than everything. Then how can you live for a job, for a house, for anything else? How can your life be anything about anything which is lower than you, which in the order of creation is below you? How can your life be then dedicated to that? How can all of your pursuits then be encapsulated in those creations? Next slide, please. Human ability and God consciousness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, what is human ability? Is it something static? Is it what, does everyone have the same amount? What is human nobility? Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. That the most noble of you are the most pious, the most God conscious of you. So this shows us that nobility has levels. Nobility itself has levels. It's what they call in Arabic tashkiki. It's the gradational. So you can have grades of nobility. The more pious you and God conscious you are, the greater your nobility increases. The greater your nobility, the more noble that you become. And the more noble you are, the more noble you act, the more noble you approach. Because it's not just a way of how, when I say you act nobly, it's not that you tell yourself, I'm a noble being and let me act nobly. When you truly work on nobility, you see no other way of acting. There is no other way to act. You only act nobly. You only emanate nobility from yourself. And that's how it works. And another ayah, and some of these I'm just going to read the English. For what my Lord forgave me and made me of the honored ones. Again, we're seeing that nobility is being linked to actions. First, it's linked to taqwa, your good actions, your God consciousness. Your nobility is directly linked to that. In this one, we're saying that my Lord forgave me. So He removed any shortcomings from me. And He made me one of the honorable ones. When I was forgiven, when I was free from those sins or those shortcomings, I was from the mukarrameen. Next slide, please. Again, another ayah. If you avoid major sins that you are forbidden, He will absolve you of your misdeeds and admit you into a noble abode. The start of human beings is nobility. لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. And God talks about when He created them, He ennobled them. And then He makes the end also about nobility. What does He say? That we وَنُدْخِلَهُمْ مُدْخَلًا كَرِيمًا. That we put him into a noble end. And the end is also noble, of the noble human being. So the start is from nobility, and then the return is towards that which is appropriate for a noble being. The ayah after this says, do not covet the advantage which Allah has given you, the merit that God has given you, has given some of you over others. To men belongs a share of what they have earned, and to women a share of what they have earned. And ask Allah for His grace. Indeed, Allah has knowledge of all things. And again, the separation of human beings earn what they earn, but it makes specific that men earn something and women earn something. They're not to be compared with one another, but they have their own capacity of what they earn, and they have their own trajectory of how they nobility, right? So men have a particular way of perfecting the nobility, and women have a particular way. And each of them will take what they have earned. So the divine plan for the preservation of human nobility. How does God make sure that these human beings I've given this amazing quality of nobility to, how are they going to preserve it? Should I leave them by themselves and hope, inshallah, like what Sheikh Amin said, inshallah, let them work out themselves? No, He's done so through the beliefs, the ethics, and the law. He's created belief. He's sent messengers who teach us beliefs, which tell us that Do not worship that which below you. Do not worship, don't do shirk of anyone other than Allah. You've been created for something great. You've been created for ibadah. So do not sell yourself short. So through the belief systems that are imparted. Then through the ethics, there's ethical teachings in the hadith. It says the one who, for example, honors himself will never fall into chasing shahawat. The one who honors himself will never chase the shahawat. The one who, for example, honors themselves will never act in certain ways. Imam Ali, in a very beautiful and powerful statement, is quoted to have said that, "Oh Allah, let the first noble thing that is taken from me, let the first noble thing that is taken from me be my life." What does that mean? Saying, God, don't let any other noble characteristic be taken from me. Let me not be devoid of any noble characteristic, generosity, kindness, patience. Don't take any away. I'd rather you take my life before you take any of those noble characteristics from me. أول كريمة. And then law. Law is also there. Human beings, you can advise them, but unfortunately, advice itself doesn't always work. Or some people may care about preserving their nobility, but others may not allow it. So then there's a system of laws. And these laws in mind have that this human being I have created, God is saying, I've created this human being, I've made him noble. I need to make sure that he or she grows up in an environment that respects the fact that they're noble and that facilitates them accomplishing their nobility and does not become an obstacle in them removing away from that nobility. So human rights, the last section. So nobility is from God. God understands the human being. He understands the human creation. He has a specific plan for this noble human being. He has a specific expectation. He didn't create you and leave you. No, he gave you benefits. And you'll be asked about these blessings that he's given you, the blessing of karama and others. So he's got a plan for it. He has expectations now that he's given it. And not for himself, for you. He's given you potential and wants you to actualize that potential. So human rights, the question of human rights comes in. Human rights question is very deeply connected with the question of nobility. In fact, the charter, the Human Rights Charter, or the Charter of Human Rights, starts off by speaking about human nobility. It says that the rights are there because to observe and to preserve human nobility. It's saying that the Charter itself claims that its role is to preserve human nobility. The question arises though, where do human rights come from? Who decides? Do I decide? Do you decide what your right is? Because what is a right? Right is how your relationship with other things, other beings, other entities. That's what a right is, right? Like if you're by yourself, there's no discussion of rights. I'm just here. And we're not talking, of course, in the Islamic sense, we have the eyes and our body parts have a right over us. But if you're by yourself, there's no one else there. There's no animal, there's no human being, there's nothing. There's no food in front of you. It's not like I have a right to that food, I have a right. So rights come in relation to others. So what's the source of these rights then? Do each of us decide individually? Do we come and decide collectively? The source has to be the same person that curated the human being. We believe it comes from God. And it can only come from God because only God truly understands the value. I don't understand I don't understand what nobility means, even after speaking about it for an hour up here. Like, what does it mean for me to be noble? Like, how am I going to change my actions when I step out of here? So how can I decide the rights that I need to maintain to ensure that I remain noble, that I'm ennobled? It comes from God. The source is God. And then what's the scope? What's the scope of these rights? They relate to all facets of human reality. And hopefully we're going to take this and we'll move forward. And I didn't go into the examples, I didn't go into the details of how the nobility looks in actions. We mentioned general things. We mentioned generosity and kindness and patience and the collective good. But I want you to think about it. I want you to think next time when you're about to do something and think, is this befitting of me, the individual that God has created and created better than every other creation? Is this befitting of me to act in this way? Is it befitting of me to hold this grudge? Or am I much greater than this? Is it befitting of me to speak to someone like that or allow myself to be spoken to like that? To view someone like that or allow myself to be viewed like that? If I'm a noble creature, if I'm a noble creature, is it okay for me to allow other people to define elements about me, which they have no right in doing so? Or should I take charge? And should I say that, no, because this is about my nobility and because this is about my being, I won't allow just anyone to decide the terms that I use, the values that I hold. So anyways, human rights in Islam. Human rights in Islam must account for the following things. And these are a few among others. I just mentioned what I thought would provoke the most discussion. If a human right doesn't account for one of these, we cannot truly give it value, right? It has to account for one of these. It has to be rooted in the following things that we're going to mention. The human right has to be rooted in Tawheed and God's wisdom. Again, we're not saying human beings don't understand anything. We're not saying they don't have the capacity to understand great things. But what we're saying is that because we understand where we come from and we understand how creation is, we have to remember that we cannot think about the idea of dignity divorced from God's wisdom, what God sees as most wise for us, considering not just us, because God, what does he do? He connects our nobility to all of creation. So it's not that you have nobility and, I'm just care about my own nobility. No, he's connected it. Because of that nobility, you have fadila over other creation. And because you have fadila over other creation, what does that mean? That now other creation has a right over you. Right? Someone who has no power, you don't say the expectation of rights from those below them are less so. Someone who has no power has more to expect from someone above, right? So when you have fadila, because you have more to offer, because you're at advantage and a preference, then those who do not have that expect it from you. So when God tells us about human rights, he's thinking of all of creation and our role within that, our individual roles within that. The other thing that human rights must account for is the eternal nature of the soul. The problem is human beings, when the human being is not just a body, we're a soul, we live eternally. Now, if I'm following a set of ideals regarding human rights, which only account for my body in this world, and not even completely for my body, again, I won't go on a tangent. They only account for this body. They only account for my life of 70 years, 60, 80 years. May God grant you all long lives. If that right is only accounting for 70 years and has nothing to do with my entire existence, then can I really buy into it? To what extent can I buy into it? What extent can I live according to that and promote? So it has to be rooted in the eternal nature of the soul. It has to look at what happens after this. Okay, maybe in some places you have to act in this way. Everything's been created for you and we've created laws so that you don't misuse the rest of creation. That's what the ahkam are there for. They make sure that even though you are the Khalifatul Ard and all of those things, you are bound by laws that protect everyone, you and other creation. But everything you do, is it limited to just this world? Or your body here? It's your soul, right? It's impacting your soul. So if I know I have to be, maybe in some aspects, have to be in pain for a little while in this world because of a greater good, and I know that it has a long-term benefit, I'll be happy for some restrictions, right? The very cliche example of medicine and the like. But it's a real example. It's you're happy for momentary discomfort if you are sure of long-term. So when it comes to human rights, how can we just be comfortable with a philosophy that only views us as individuals that die and deteriorate and have no continue existence. The other thing that must be rooted in is connection between this world and the hereafter. Your actions have realities. Your actions are passed on. You send actions forward. تقدم وتأخر. The things that you leave behind here and things you send forward. You send your actions forward. So human rights in Islam have to be rooted in the connection between this world and the next world. They cannot be separate from that. They have to be linked to human nobility, human rights. And the nobility that we're speaking about, the nobility that's rooted in goodness, not a nobility that you get that nobility automatically when you're born because that's the default position. But that nobility can be obstructed, that nobility can be stripped. You can be pushed into an abased state. And of course, I know this question might come. When you say that someone has gone into an abased state or has abased themselves, there's a difference between an individual having nobility and how you treat them. You may still be cordial with them. It's not that, okay, this person did a sin, they came down from the nobility, that's it, it's free game, I can say what I want and do what I want. No. There's rules, there's principles. So human nobility has to be an essential and integral part of, and the real human nobility. Not the Charter talks about nobility as well. The Charter says that human rights, the purpose that they play is to, and if you read the Charter or any human rights document, it's very interesting because they can't actually explain why. So we need human nobility so people can live like this. But why? To what purpose? To what end? Like they don't answer that question. It's just we need people to be living like this. What happens? Why do for what reason do people? They deserve to be. To what end? Right? To what end? They don't have an answer to that question. We have an answer. We say they need human nobility. It has to be rooted in human nobility because it leads to. It's connected to the soul. It's connected to the hereafter. It's connected to something greater. It's connected to the ability to actualize their potential. All of this. That's why human rights. That's why. Some people translate human rights in Farsi and Arabic as hukuk bashar, which is an interesting translation because bashar is skin. They translate it in a very material way. Some people, of course, translate it as hukuk al-insan, which is more appropriate. But some people, even that mindset, like it's steeped into our cultures. Bashar, you're going to leave. That's going to leave in this world, and your soul's going to continue. Anyways, lastly. The last one I wanted to mention, there are more, is the freedom of choice. Human rights have to be linked in the freedom of choice, and we're talking about belief here, not absolute freedom. The freedom of choice, the freedom to explore beliefs and ideas, and human rights should allow and facilitate for that in a way which does not go against the other ones, right? These aren't all independent of each other. They're linked. It's not that, okay, I only look at I only look at the eternal nature of the soul. I don't look at anything else. I look at only, for example, these are all linked. Freedom has to be linked to the eternal nature of the soul. Freedom has to be linked to Tawheed. So adjusting maybe what we think of there. And I think that was the last slide. I'll end here. Thank you all again for listening. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.